As I read, mark a question wherever you are confused or curious about something. After the reading, look at the places you marked. Write your questions in the margins. Circle 2 questions to bring to the sharing questions activity. A question about a part that confuses you the most, a question about a part that interests you the most. Home Sweet Homestead by Mary Klein. In May 20, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed into law a bill that seemed too good to be true. The government was giving away 160 acres of land to each settler in the West for free. This law was called the Homestead Act. For a small filing fee, it promised land and opportunity to almost any man or woman. There were just a few conditions you had to meet to claim your 160 acres. First, you had to be a citizen of the United States or planning to become one. You had to be at least 21 years old or the head of a family. Finally, you had to live on the land for 5 years and improve it. This included building a house as well as farming and fencing part of the land. If you met these conditions, the land was yours after 5 years. Westward Ho! The term sounded like a pretty good deal to a lot of people. Before the Homestead Act, most farmers lived in the East and rented their land. The chance to own property was a tempting offer to these farmers. Others wanted to escape the overcrowding of the cities back east and the dangerous working conditions inside factories. The Homestead Act also appealed to people overseas. Immigrants escaping poverty or persecution could start a new life on America's western frontier. The Homestead Act offered a special opportunity for some groups of people. For the first time, single women could claim land in their own name. Before the Homestead Act, a woman could only own land if she inherited it from a male relative. About 1/10 of all land claims in the Great Plains came from women. For newly freed slaves, the Homestead Act was the chance for a fresh start. After the Civil War, life in the South was dangerous and difficult for former slaves. Even though slavery was officially illegal, African Americans were still mistreated by many people. The Homestead Act provided the option to escape the South and become landowners. Some thought it would be easier to start over in states that had fought against slavery, like Kansas. In 1879, one such African American man from Louisiana wrote a letter to the governor of Kansas. He wrote, "I am very anxious to reach your state, not just because of the great race now made for it, but because of the sacredness of her soil, washed by the blood of humanitarians for the cause of black freedom." Homesteaders were eager to claim their new land with its promise of fertile fields. Railroad companies even urged people to move by printing brochures with glowing descriptions of the West. Many homesteaders set out for the West full of hope and excitement. Westward, no. When homesteaders finally arrived in the West, they often faced unexpected challenges. The most flat land was nearly treeless. Without wood, most settlers had to build sod houses from the slabs of dirt held together with woven prairie glass. These houses stayed cool in the summer and warm in the winter. They also held up well against fire and windstorms, but otherwise they were not very pleasant to live in. The roofs leaked mud during rainstorms. They dropped dirt where they were dry. Mice, snakes, and insects lived in the dirt walls and could burrow into the house. Hetty Lee Anderson was 25 years old when she moved to Nebraska with her husband, Newt, and their 4 children. Hattie kept a diary of her homesteading experiences from 1884 to 1889. In it, she described the challenges her husband faced in building a home. He not only had hard and heavy work to do breaking the sod, hauling water a long distance for every purpose, but one of the hardest tasks was the building of a huge sod stable. For this, he not only had to lift the heavy sod pieces in place, but had to go down in the canyons and cut and drag out the timbers for the framework. These were not the only unexpected hardships. Extreme heat, blizzards, windstorms, hailstorms, and tornadoes were common. Prairie fires and locusts could destroy homes and crops. In 1874, millions of locusts swarmed the Great Plains and ate just about everything in sight. Farmers tied the bottoms of their pant legs with string to keep the insects from crawling in. Then they watched helplessly as the locusts ate everything: crops, grass, clothing, horse harnesses, tools, and the paint from wagons. They even ate the wool off the farmers' sheep. Through it all, people worked constantly. Everyone, including children, worked long hours to build their homes and stables, water their fields, and tend their crops and animals. And in between all the hard work, there was not much time to talk to other people. Neighbors usually lived far away too. This meant that farm families were often isolated and lonely. In her diary, Hetty Lee Anderson describes how she felt about homesteading after several years. Homesteading is anything but what we had pictured. Though we had expected privations and hardships, we were not prepared for the trying experiences of these years of unrequited toil too great. Not one. Still, not every homesteader felt the same as Hetty. Eleanor Pruitt was a single mother who moved to a homestead in Wyoming. A former washerwoman, she greatly preferred homesteading to city life. She said, "To me, homesteading is the solution of all poverty's problems, but I realize that temperament has much to do with success in any undertaking, and persons afraid of coyotes and work and loneliness had better let ranching alone. At the same time, any woman who can stand her own company can see the beauty of the sunset, loves growing things, and is willing to put in as much time at careful labor as she does over the washtub will certainly succeed, will have independence, plenty to eat all the time, and a home of her own in the end." Maddie Oblinger, a homesteader in Nebraska, wrote a letter to her family back east in 1873. In it, she talked about how good it was to have her own home. "I expect you think we live miserable because we are in a sod house, but I tell you in a solid earnest I never enjoyed myself better. Every lick we strike is for ourselves, and not half for someone else. I tell you this is quite a consolation to us who have been renters so long. There are no renters here. Everyone is on his own and doing the best he can." Although many homesteaders succeeded in building better lives for themselves, many others did not, but together they built the West. Over the years, homestead farmers claimed 270 million acres of land. They became the agricultural producers to the whole nation. They built towns and communities for future generations. Without them, America would not be the same today.